The fence post leaned like it was tired of holding him. His head hung low, chin almost on his chest. Dust clung to his face in thick patches. Sweat traced thin rivers down his neck. The ropes around his wrists were tight enough to cut skin. She walked out from the cookhouse with the bread still warm in her hands. No one tried to stop her. They just watched. Ranch hands leaning on rails, squinting against the sun. She stopped in front of him. "Are you breathing?" He lifted his head slowly. "Some." The heat rolled between them. She glanced at the knots, pulled the knife from her apron pocket. "You're cutting him loose," one of the men called from behind her. She didn't turn. "I am." "You know what he is." "I know he's hungry." The blade slid through the first rope. His skin showed raw underneath. She cut the second, and his arms dropped, stiff from holding the weight. "You gonna thank her?" Another voice barked. He swallowed. "Thank you." She nodded once. "Come on." He staggered as she walked ahead. The loaf stayed tucked under her arm. Inside the cookhouse, the air smelled of onions and wood smoke. She pulled a chair from the corner, set it at the table, and dropped the bread in front of him. "Eat." He hesitated. "You don't want to know?" "I want you to eat." His hand shook when he tore the first piece. He chewed slowly, eyes fixed on the table. "You steal it?" she asked. "No." "Then why were you tied to my fence?" He swallowed another bite. "They think I did." Her spoon scraped the pot on the stove. "And did you?" He shook his head. "Not for me." She set a bowl of stew next to the bread. He stared at it, then at her. "You always feed thieves." "I feed anyone who's hungry." From outside, boots hit the porch boards. The door opened without knocking. "Afternoon, ma'am." The voice was the sheriff's, calm, steady, heavy with the kind of authority that didn't need to shout. She didn't look up. "Afternoon." His eyes flicked to the bounty hunter. "You're looking better than you did an hour ago." "Guess I am," the man said. "You know why you're here?" the sheriff asked. The bounty hunter tore another piece of bread. "Because somebody wanted me dead." The sheriff smiled, but it didn't touch his eyes. "Or because you take what isn't yours." She stepped between them. "He's eating." "Not for long," the sheriff said. "You're coming with me." The bounty hunter kept chewing. "I'm not done." "Now," the sheriff said, his voice flattening. She set the ladle down. "You're in my kitchen, Sheriff." The silence stretched. The sheriff's gaze slid over her, then back to the man at the table. "You're feeding trouble, ma'am." She didn't blink. "Then trouble eats good here." The sheriff chuckled once, low, and stepped back to the door. "Suit yourself, but you'll regret it." The door shut. The bounty hunter tore another piece of bread. "You always talk to him like that." "Only when he deserves it." He finished the bowl and pushed it back. "I didn't steal from them. I was getting food for someone who couldn't." "Who?" He hesitated. "Doesn't matter now." She leaned on the table. "Matters to me." His jaw tightened. "A kid." Her eyes narrowed. "Yours?" "No." The cookhouse quieted, the only sound the ticking of the stove. "You from here?" she asked. "No." "Then why come?" He shrugged. "Work." "What kind?" "The kind that pays in cash and trouble." She studied him a moment longer, then stood. "You can finish the bread, then you leave." He looked at the loaf. "And if I don't?" "Then you work for it." He gave the smallest smile, one side of his mouth lifting. "What kind of work?" "The kind that keeps you off my fence." He didn't answer, just reached for more bread. Outside, the men were still leaning on the rails, their voices low. The cook stepped to the window, watching them. She could feel the weight of their stares, the questions they wouldn't ask her face to face. "You scared of them?" he asked behind her. "No." "You should be." She turned. "Why?" "They don't like that you cut me down." She wiped her hands on her apron. "Let them not like it." His eyes held hers a second longer than they should have. There was something there. Not gratitude, not quite, but regret, heavy and restless. "Tomorrow," she said, "you help me with the stove. Then you go." He nodded, though it looked reluctant. "You got a name?" she asked. "Elias." She nodded. "You can call me May." Elias glanced at the bread. "Good bread, May." "Better when you earn it," she said. The heat pressed against the walls. Outside, the sound of boots on gravel faded toward the barn. May went back to the stove, the knife still on the counter. She didn't put it away. May didn't look back to see if Elias was following. She could hear his steps, uneven on the porch, the scrape of boots that had walked too far without rest. Inside, the heat from the stove wrapped around them. She set the bread on the table, poured stew into a chipped bowl, and pushed it toward him without a word. He sat like a man expecting the chair to give way beneath him. His hand stayed on his knees. She nudged the bowl closer. "Eat." He broke the bread, steam curling up. The smell of yeast and smoke filled the space between them. Outside, the foreman's voice carried through the open door. "May, you know what you're doing." She didn't turn. "I do. You're keeping a coyote under your roof." "Then I'll keep my chickens close." A pause, then the sound of spit hitting dirt. "Coyotes bite, May." She shut the door. Elias dipped bread into the stew, eyes low. "They don't like you helping me." "They don't have to like it." He chewed slowly. The scrape of his spoon against the bowl was louder than it should have been. She poured herself coffee, leaning against the counter. "You always feed strangers?" he asked. "When they're tied to my fence, yes." "That's dangerous." "So I'm starving." The stove hissed as she ladled another bowl, this one for herself. She sat across from him. The table was small enough, their knees almost touched. "Where were you headed?" she asked. "Nowhere worth naming." "Where did you come from?" He smirked without humor. "Something like that." The stew cooled in front of her, untouched. She was watching him, the way his shoulders stayed tight, the way he glanced toward the window every few bites. "Are you expecting someone?" she asked. He shook his head. "Just making sure no one's expecting me." The front door creaked. One of the younger hands stepped in, hat in hand. "May, foreman says you oughta—" "I heard what he said." The boy's eyes darted to Elias. "Ain't wise. Neither is standing in my kitchen without washing your boots." The boy backed out quickly. The door shut again. Elias set his spoon down. "You talk to all of them like that. They work for me here. In this room, I'm the law." He nodded once as if filing that away. They ate quietly for a while. She watched the lines on his face soften as the food worked its way through him. "You've been on the trail a while," she said. "Too long." "They catch you working?" "They caught me breathing." She didn't push. The foreman's shadow passed by the window again. May sipped her coffee, letting the bitterness settle on her tongue. "Are you afraid of him?" Elias asked. "No." "You should be." She raised an eyebrow. "Why?" "Because he's not the one you need to be afraid of." "The man who told him to tie me there. That's the one." She leaned back in her chair. "You go and tell me his name." He looked at his hands. "Not yet." The clock on the wall ticked loud enough to feel. May stood, took his empty bowl, and set it in the sink. The water hissed as she poured it from the kettle. "Are you planning on staying long?" she asked. "I'm not planning on staying at all." "Then why are you still here?" He met her eyes for the first time since they sat down. "Because you didn't ask me to leave." Her hand stilled on the dishcloth. "Maybe I will. Maybe you won't." The space between them felt too small, the air too heavy. She turned back to the stove, stirring a pot that didn't need stirring. From outside, the foreman's voice rose again, talking low to another hand. Elias tilted his head, listening. "They'll try something," he said. "Let them." "You got a weapon?" "I have a stove." "That won't stop a bullet." She looked over her shoulder. "Neither will running." He smiled then, faint, almost unwilling. "You don't scare easily." "I don't scared at all." She poured him more coffee without asking. He wrapped his hands around the mug like it was the first warmth he'd felt in weeks. "You gonna tell me your story?" she asked. "One day. I'll hold you to it." They drank in silence. The fire in the stove popped, throwing shadows across the walls. Outside, the foreman's boots crunched in the dirt, fading toward the barn. May glanced at the window, then back to Elias. "You finish that coffee, then you rest. Tomorrow you work." He didn't argue. The wind rattled the door once before settling. Somewhere out back, a horse kicked against its stall. The kitchen smelled of bread, coffee, and the faint iron tang of someone else's trouble. The sound of hooves came first, slow and deliberate, the kind that marked a man who wanted to be heard before he was seen. May didn't look up from the pot she was stirring. Elias sat at the table, hunched over the last of the bread, his shoulders stiffening with each step that drew closer. The door swung open without a knock. Dust drifted in ahead of the man who filled the doorway. Hat low, badge catching the light, boots coated in the road, the sheriff stepped in like it was his kitchen, not hers. "Afternoon, May." She didn't stop stirring. "Sheriff." His gaze slid to Elias. "I hear you've been keeping company." May ladled stew into a bowl, steam curling between them. "I've been feeding a man." The sheriff's jaw tightened. "You know who he is?" "I know he's hungry." "That's not all he is." Elias didn't look up. "You got something to say. Say it." The sheriff stepped closer, boots thudding against the wood. "You should be in a cell, not sitting at a table like you belong here." May's hand stilled on the ladle. "He's eating." "Not for long." "Are you planning to take him?" she asked. "That's the idea." Her eyes met his. "You'll wait until he's finished." The sheriff's smirk was slow, almost lazy. "Are you always so hospitable to thieves?" "I'm hospitable to anyone who knocks." "You didn't." A flicker of something passed over his face, gone as quick as it came. He looked at Elias again. "What's your play here? Think hiding in a kitchen keeps you safe?" Elias finally looked up, eyes sharp. "Safer than being tied to your fence." The sheriff's smile didn't reach his eyes. "You want to tell me how you ended up there?" "No," Elias said. May set the bowl in front of him. "Eat." The sheriff watched Elias take a slow bite, then turned his attention back to her. "May, you know what trouble looks like." "I do," she said. "And I know when it walks into my kitchen uninvited." His tongue pressed against his cheek. "Careful, May. You've got a good place here. It would be a shame if it changed." "Are you threatening me?" "I'm reminding you." She kept her gaze steady. "I remember plenty." The room went still, save for the faint crackle of the stove. Outside, a horse shifted in the dirt, the sound sharp in the quiet. "You're making a mistake," the sheriff said. "Maybe," she replied, "but it's mine to make." His eyes lingered on her, searching for a crack. When he didn't find one, he took a step back. "I'll be seeing you." May's voice stayed level. "Not if I see you first." The sheriff laughed once, low and humorless, and walked out. Through the window, May watched him mount his horse. Dust kicked up as he rode away, slow enough to make sure they knew he wasn't in a hurry. Elias set the spoon down. "He's not going to let this go." "I know." "You going to tell me what he's got against you?" She shook her head. "Not today." He leaned back in his chair. "It feels like everyone's got secrets here." "That's because they do." He studied her. "And yours. It doesn't matter to you." "Maybe they do." She moved to the counter, busying herself with the bread knife. "Eat your stew, Elias." He took another bite, slower this time, watching her. "You're not afraid of him." "Should I be?" "Most people are." "I'm not most people." He gave a short nod, like he'd expected that answer. "He's gonna come back. Then we'll be ready." "We?" "You're under my roof," she said. "That makes it our problem." A shadow of a smile tugged at his mouth. "I don't remember agreeing to that." "You ate my bread," she said simply. The corner of his smile faded. "That's all it takes." "It's enough." They fell quiet. The stew cooled between them, the air thick with what neither was willing to say. May washed the ladle, the scrape of metal against the pot loud in the silence. From the yard came the muffled sound of voices, the foreman and another hand talking low. Elias glanced toward the door, his hand brushing the table's edge like he was ready to move. "Are you thinking of running?" she asked. "Thinking about it. You wouldn't get far." "You'd stop me." "I'd watch you go," she said. "Then I'd make sure you knew where to come back." He studied her a moment longer, then picked up the spoon again. The day outside pressed against the windows, the sun bleaching the wood pale. Inside, the shadows stretched long, catching on the knife she hadn't put away. Elias ate without looking up, but May could see the tension in his jaw, the same tightness she'd seen when the sheriff smirked. The smell of stew lingered, mixing with the faint scent of dust the sheriff had tracked in. A reminder that his boots had crossed her floor, and might again. May stood at the sink, sleeves rolled to her elbows, the knife in her hand catching the dim light. She worked the cloth over the blade slowly, edge to hilt, as if there was no hurry in the world. Water dripped steady from the spout, splashing on steel before running down into the basin. Elias sat at the table, elbows on the wood, his eyes fixed on a knot in the grain. "I didn't take that bread for me," he said finally. May didn't turn. No? No. Then who? A kid. Her hands kept moving, cloth sliding over the knife. Yours? No. The water hissed as it hit the blade again. Then why? He shrugged. Because she was hungry. May set the knife in the rack, reached for another. And that's worth getting yourself tied to my fence? I didn't expect to get caught. That's what they all say. Elias looked up, his face unreadable. You don't believe me. I don't have to. The silence stretched, filled only by the faint tap of water on metal. Outside, boots scuffed against dirt. A shadow moved across the window. Elias's gaze flicked toward it. Someone's out there. May didn't glance up. They've been out there all morning. Who? Foreman, maybe one of his boys. Are they looking for me? They're looking to see what I'll do. He leaned back in the chair, the legs creaking. And what will you do? She rinsed the knife, set it aside. Depends. On what? On whether you're telling me the truth. I am. Then you've got nothing to worry about. Elias gave a short, humorless laugh. That's not how it works here. May dried her hands, the towel rough against her fingers. She crossed the room, stood by the table. You think I don't know that? He met her eyes. Maybe you do. Maybe you forgot. I won't forget. The shadow outside shifted again, lingering at the far edge of the window. May's gaze slid toward it, then back to Elias. Are you planning to let them watch all day? He asked. They'll get bored. And if they don't? She took a step toward the door. Then they'll come in. Elias's hand twitched toward the edge of the table. And what then? Then they'll leave. He stared at her like he was trying to read something she wasn't saying. You've done this before. May didn't answer. She went back to the sink, picking up another knife, the water splashing over it. You got people here? He asked. No. Family? Grave out the back. Elias's jaw tightened. Sorry. May didn't look at him. Don't be. She's sorry. The air in the room felt heavier. Outside, the sound of spurs shifted closer to the window. Elias's eyes followed the movement. They're not leaving, he said. Not yet. You want me gone. If I wanted you gone, you'd be gone. Then why keep me? She set the knife down, turned to face him. Because you're not lying about that bread. His brow furrowed. How can you tell? I can tell. For a moment, neither spoke. The boots outside moved away, slow. Elias let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Have you ever thought about leaving? He asked. Once. What stopped you? Same thing that keeps you here right now. Elias studied her. What's that? The fact that running doesn't change a thing. The last of the water dripped from the faucet. May turned it off, the sudden quiet ringing in the room. She wiped the counter once, twice, her movements unhurried. Elias shifted in his chair. So what now? You finish your coffee, then you work. He gave a faint smile. Still making me earn my bread? Always. Outside, the sound of boots faded toward the barn. May picked up the last knife, running the cloth over it one final time. Her eyes caught the window again, just long enough to see the shadow disappear. The room smelled faintly of soap and steel, the kind of scent that stayed on your hands long after the work was done. Elias sat back, watching her, the unspoken hanging between them. The night was dry enough to taste the dust. It swirled in the lantern light as May stepped out onto the porch. The screen door closed behind her with a tired squeak. Elias leaned against the rail, hat shadowing his eyes, looking toward the dark stretch of land past the fence. You don't sleep? She asked. Not much worth dreaming about, he said. She moved closer, the boards underfoot groaning. Are you thinking of leaving? He shook his head. Thinking about telling you something. She waited, arms crossed against the faint chill. The man who had me tied up, he said after a pause, goes by Calder. The name hit like a stone in her chest. Her eyes narrowed. Calder, she repeated, tasting the weight of it. That's him. Tall, dark hair turning gray. Knows how to smile when he's lying. May's jaw worked. Why does he want you dead? Elias's gaze stayed fixed on the horizon. Because I took something from him, something he needs to keep breathing easy. What? A ledger, names, dates, payments, enough to tell the whole story of what he's been running. And what's he been running? People, Elias said flatly, bringing them in on promises, sending them somewhere they can't get out of. May's fingers tightened on her arms. And you still have it? Not here. It's with someone I trust. You trust they'll keep it safe. I trust they'll use it if I don't make it. Her eyes flicked toward the far pasture, where the fence ran pale under the moon. Calder's been here before. Elias turned toward her. When? Years ago, before my sister died. His brow knit. What was he doing here? Talking to the sheriff, laughing like they'd been boys together. That doesn't surprise me, Elias muttered. May looked away, her voice dropping. My sister left one morning to settle a debt. Never came back. Elias didn't press, but the set of his jaw told her he understood more than she wanted to say. They found her wagon 2 towns over, May continued. No trace of her. The sheriff called it a robbery gone wrong. You didn't believe him. I've been feeding her grave for years, she said. And Calder's the reason. The night thickened between them. Somewhere in the dark, a cricket's song broke and started again. Have you ever thought about killing him? Elias asked. May's eyes lifted to meet his. Every day. He nodded once, slow. Then we might already be on the same side. She stepped off the porch, her boots sinking into the powdery dirt. If Calder's after you, he'll circle back here. I know. You gonna run when he does? Number, I'm going to finish what I started. May studied him, searching for cracks in his resolve. That ledger, if we had it, could we end him? It's enough to take him apart piece by piece. Every name in it would see him burn. Then we'll need it. Elias's gaze sharpened. We? You're under my roof, she said. His name's carved into my history the same as yours. He almost smiled. Then we'll need a plan. The first thing is making sure the sheriff doesn't block us, May said. That's a tall order. Nothing worth doing is easy. They walked toward the fence, boards casting long shadows in the moonlight. Elias rested a hand on the post where she'd found him days before. Feels strange standing here free, he murmured. You'll get used to being strange, she replied. He glanced at her. You sound like you already have. May didn't answer. Her eyes were on the land beyond the low dip toward the creek. She knew the dirt out there, knew how it clung to a coffin and the hands that lowered it. Elias broke the quiet. If we move on him, we can't do it here. Too many eyes. I know a place, she said. Safe? Number but empty. That'll work. They started back toward the porch. The lantern light caught the dust around them, each mote hanging in the air before vanishing into the night. Inside, the low fire in the stove still burned, waiting. The sky was only just thinking about light when May stepped out, loaf wrapped in a cloth and tucked under her arm. The air was cold enough to bite, the kind that made breath come out in clouds. Frost clung to the grass in brittle shards, snapping under her boots as she crossed the yard. Elias followed at a distance, coat collar turned up, hands shoved deep in his pockets. He didn't ask where she was going until they passed the last fence post. Are you always out here this early? May didn't slow. Sometimes. Why? She didn't answer. The ground dipped, the path narrowing between 2 leaning cedar trees. Beyond them, a small clearing opened, the frost thinning where the sun's first light reached. At its center stood a headstone, edges worn, letters softened by weather and time. May crouched, unwrapping the loaf and setting it at the base like an offering. Elias stopped a few paces back. That for my sister, May said, still looking at the stone. He didn't move closer. How long? 8 years. The loaf sat there, steam barely visible in the cold. May brushed a leaf from the stone, her fingers lingering on the name carved shallow. What happened? He asked. She left to pay off a debt, never came home. Elias's jaw tightened. Calder. May nodded. Sheriff called it bad luck. I called it something else. He looked past her at the trees, the pale sky behind them. You do this every year. Every week. Bread? It was the one thing she'd eat no matter what, even on days she couldn't keep anything else down. Elias shifted his weight, boots crunching in the frost. His silence stretched, heavy, like he was carrying something in it. You got someone? May asked without looking at him. His eyes flickered. Not anymore. Gone? Yeah. They stood like that for a while, the only sound the faint hiss of wind through the trees. You think she'd want you doing this? Elias asked. May straightened. Doesn't matter. I do it for me. He nodded, as if he understood that better than most would. Have you ever thought about moving on? This is moving on, just not away. Elias's hands flexed in his pockets. You hold on to things. So do you, she said, glancing at him. He didn't deny it. The sun pushed higher, turning the frost to water. Drops slid off the stone, darkening the moss at its base. May's eyes followed one until it disappeared into the dirt. "You said Calder's name like you've been saying it for years," Elias said. "I have." "What will you do when you see him again?" She looked at the headstone. "I'll make sure it's the last time." Elias stepped closer now, close enough to see the fine cracks in the stone, the way her fingers hovered just above her sister's name. "I could help." "You already are," she said. He studied her face. "That ledger, if we use it, there's no going back." "Good," she said simply. The breeze shifted, carrying the smell of wood smoke from the ranch. May rewrapped the cloth around the loaf, careful not to brush away the warmth that still clung to it. "You leave it here," Elias said. "What happens to it?" "Somebody takes it. Doesn't matter who." "You don't care?" "It's bread. It's meant to be. Eaten." He let out a breath, almost a laugh, but not quite. "You've got a strange way of holding on and letting go at the same time." "It's the only way that works," she said. They started back toward the ranch, the cedars closing around them again. The frost was already retreating, leaving the earth damp and dark. "You believe in curses?" Elias asked suddenly. May glanced at him. "Why?" "Feels like I've been walking under one for years." "Some things aren't curses," she said. "They're just debts waiting to be settled." He was quiet for a long moment. "And Calder's yours." "Mine and half of this county's," she said. They reached the yard, the fence line catching the morning light. Elias stopped, looking back toward the clearing. "Does she have a name?" "Lena," May said. He nodded once, the name sitting heavy in the air before fading. "She'd like to know if you still bring the bread." "She already knows," May said, and stepped up onto the porch. Elias followed, glancing over his shoulder one last time before the door closed behind them. The stove's heat pressed against May's back as she worked, shifting the heavy pot so the stew wouldn't catch on the bottom. The smell of onions and browned meat filled the room. She moved with practiced rhythm. Ladle, stir, taste, add. Elias sat at the table, one leg stretched, the other bent, a half-finished cup of coffee cooling beside him. His eyes weren't on her or the food. They followed the faint sway of the apron tied at her waist. When she bent to reach for the salt, a corner of folded paper peeked from the deep side pocket. The edge was frayed, creased in the way of something handled more than once. May stepped to the pantry. Elias rose without sound, boots soft on the worn boards. He reached, fingers brushing the paper free. The letter was plain. No seal, no envelope, just her name scrawled across in a hand he recognized, even without ever having read it. Calder's. He turned it over, thumb tracing the lines of the fold. His eyes narrowed. He didn't break it open. Instead, he slid it back into the pocket exactly as it had been. May turned, catching the last movement of his hand. Her gaze landed on his fingers before lifting to his face. "Find something." Elias sat back down slowly. "No." The spoon tapped against the pot. "You're a poor liar." He didn't answer. "You saw it," she said. Elias's jaw worked. "Yeah." "You read it?" "No." "Why not?" "Didn't need to." May ladled stew into a bowl, set it on the table in front of him. "You think you know what it says." "I know who wrote it." She didn't sit. "And that's enough to make your hands shake?" His eyes lifted sharply to hers, but he didn't deny it. "What does he want with you?" Her voice stayed steady. "What he always wanted." Control. Elias pushed the bowl away, untouched. "Then why keep it?" May glanced at the apron pocket. "Because it's proof." "Of what?" "That he's still watching." The air between them held still for a beat. Outside, the wind rattled the loose shutter, each knock like a slow heartbeat. "Are you planning to answer him?" Elias asked. "No." "Are you planning to burn it?" "Not yet." His brow furrowed. "You holding on to it for the same reason I hold on to the ledger?" She gave a small shrug. "Some things you keep because they're a weapon. Some because they remind you what you're up against." Elias leaned forward, elbows on the table. "And which is this?" "Both." May turned back to the stove, the flames shifting under the grate. Elias watched the set of her shoulders, the way her movements never lost their precision, even when the conversation cut close. "He'll use it," Elias said. "He'll try to pull you in before he breaks you." "He's already tried." "And?" "He failed." Elias's mouth pulled into something between a smile and a grimace. "That's not something Calder forgets." I'm counting on it. She moved to the counter, slicing a heel off the loaf from that morning. The knife's scrape on the board was sharp, clean. She set the bread beside his bowl. You want me to keep it? Elias asked. No, she said. If he sent it to me, I'm the one who finishes it. Finish it how? She didn't answer. Elias leaned back, chair creaking. One day you'll tell me what's in it. One day you'll see for yourself. His eyes flicked to the apron again, then to her face. You ever think maybe holding on to it's exactly what he wants? Every day, she said. And every day I decide it's worth the risk. The kettle began to whistle sharp in the small kitchen. May poured hot water into a chipped mug, the steam curling between them. She slid it toward him. He wrapped his hands around it, letting the heat sink into his fingers. You're not afraid of him. I am, she said, surprising him. But fear doesn't mean I let him win. Elias studied her for a long moment. That's not the kind of fear most people carry. Then maybe most people never had reason to learn. She turned back to the stove, ladle moving in slow circles through the stew. Elias watched her work, the letter's shape pressing faintly against the fabric at her side. Outside, a horse snorted, and the sound of boots on gravel passed close to the porch. Elias's eyes shifted toward the door. May didn't look up. Foreman, she said, you can tell just from the steps? I can tell from the hesitation. The boots stopped, then moved on. The quiet that followed was almost heavier than the sound had been. Elias took a sip from the mug. One day, Calder's going to walk through that door. May set the ladle down. Then I hope he's ready for what's waiting. The cloud sat low and heavy, the kind that pressed the air flat. May's horse moved at an easy pace, hooves dull against the hard-packed road. Elias rode beside her, his hat brim pulled down, eyes fixed ahead. They hadn't spoken since leaving the yard. The leather of the saddle creaked with each shift of her weight. The smell of rain lingered, though the ground was still dry. In the distance, the town's outline rose, a scatter of rooftops and one tall church steeple cutting against the gray. They passed the blacksmith's, the clang of hammer on metal ringing out in short, sharp bursts. Elias glanced toward it but said nothing. His shoulders stayed tense, like he was waiting for something to break the silence. When the sheriff's office came into view, his gaze hardened. The front door was open, a chair tilted back just inside the shadowed doorway. As they passed, Elias leaned slightly toward her. That man would have starved me just to see if I'd beg. May kept her eyes on the road. She didn't answer, but her hand brushed the cloth bag tied to her saddle. She could feel the shape of the loaf inside, still warm from that morning. Elias noticed, his mouth tightening. You always carry bread with you. Not always. Then why now? Because you're here. The road narrowed as they moved past the last of the storefronts. May caught movement from the corner of her eye, a figure leaning against the post outside the saloon watching them. Elias saw it too, but neither turned their head. You recognize him? May asked. No, Elias said, but he recognizes me. They kept riding. The sound of voices from the saloon faded, replaced by the hollow rattle of a loose shutter somewhere down the street. You think the sheriff knows we're here? Elias asked. He knew the minute we left the ranch, May replied. They passed the feed store. An old man sweeping the porch paused to watch them, his eyes lingering longer on Elias than on her. Feels like the whole place is waiting for something, Elias said. They are. What? Trouble. He gave a low chuckle that held no humor. They won't have to wait long. The sky darkened, the clouds swelling above them. May pulled her coat tighter, her gaze on the road leading out the other side of town. Where are we headed? Elias asked. Supply run, she said. That's all? For now. They stopped in front of the general store. May dismounted first, tying her horse to the post. Elias followed, scanning the street before stepping down. Inside, the air was warmer, thick with the smell of coffee and grain. May moved through the aisles with purpose, gathering flour, salt, and beans. Elias trailed behind, eyes flicking to the windows every few seconds. You always shop this fast? He asked. I don't like standing still in town. He reached for a sack of sugar, set it on the counter. Because of him? Because of everyone who works for him. The storekeeper wrapped their goods in paper and twine, his glance darting toward Elias more than once. May paid without comment. When they stepped back outside, the street was quieter. The man from the saloon was gone, but the empty space he'd left felt like it was still watching them. Elias untied the horses. Are we riding straight back? That was the plan. As they turned toward the road out of town, the sheriff stepped out from behind the office door. He stood in the middle of the street, hands loose at his sides. May didn't stop, didn't look directly at him. Elias's eyes locked on the sheriff's as they passed. The man didn't speak, but his smirk was enough to set Elias's jaw tight again. Once they were past, Elias let out a slow breath. "He's waiting for you to slip." May kept her gaze forward. "Then I won't." The road stretched empty ahead, framed by the gray swell of clouds. Behind them, the town faded into a blur of wood and dust. "You think Calder's here?" Elias asked. "Not yet," she said. "But soon." Elias adjusted his reins. "When he comes, we'll be ready." May didn't answer, but her hand drifted again toward the bag at her side, feeling the bread's weight against her palm. The air in town was heavy with the smell of dust and horses. May stepped down from her saddle in front of the general store, tying her reins to the post. Elias swung down beside her, scanning the street like every shadow was worth counting. Inside, the store was quiet except for the scrape of the shopkeeper's broom. May moved down the aisle, selecting sacks of flour, beans, and salt. She didn't linger. Elias drifted toward the back, disappearing between shelves lined with tools and oil lamps. When she brought her goods to the counter, the shopkeeper rang them up without a word. She glanced toward the rear of the store, catching sight of Elias speaking low with a man whose coat was too heavy for the weather. She couldn't hear the words, but she saw the way the man's eyes flicked toward her before handing Elias a small wrapped parcel. Elias rejoined her just as she lifted the flour sack from the counter. "Ready?" he asked. "Always," she said, stepping out into the street. They rode back in silence, the wind shifting now and then to carry the faint rumble of thunder from far off. The sky stayed dry, but the smell of rain was close enough to taste. At the ranch, May slid down from her horse and carried the flour inside, setting it on the counter beside the stove. When she loosened the knot in the paper sack, her fingers brushed something hard beneath the top layer. She opened it, peeling back the paper until the dull gleam of metal caught the light. A revolver, wrapped tight in a strip of cloth, sat nestled against the flour. Her eyes narrowed. "You put this here?" Elias stood in the doorway, one hand still on the frame. "Yeah." "Why?" "For when the sheriff stops knocking." May stared at the weapon, the weight of it pulling the air in the room tighter. "You think I'll need it?" "I know you will." She folded the paper back over the gun, fingers pressing the edges shut. "And you didn't think to ask first?" "I didn't think you'd say yes," he said, stepping inside. "You're right about that." He moved closer, his voice low. "It's not a gift. It's insurance." May slid the sack back into place. "I don't want to be armed by someone else's choice." Elias leaned against the counter. "And yet you're not throwing it out." She met his eyes for a long moment before looking away. "Not yet." The sound of voices drifted in from outside, two ranch hands talking near the barn. Neither of them came close to the house, but the tone was sharp, carrying just enough for May to know her name was in it. "They'll talk," Elias said, glancing toward the window. "They always do. And when talk turns into something else, that's when I decide how far I'm willing to go," she replied. Elias's gaze dropped to the flour sack. "If you decide, you'll be ready." She picked up the loaf in the morning, setting it on the cutting board. The knife moved through it clean, each slice falling in neat pieces. "Have you ever killed anyone?" she asked without looking at him. "Yeah," he said, no hesitation. "Do you regret it?" "Sometimes." She set the knife down, crumbs scattering across the wood. "And Calder?" His voice hardened. "No regrets there." The wind rattled the loose shutter outside, a hollow tapping that filled the pause between them. May wrapped the bread in cloth, tucking it aside. "You keep that gun loaded?" she asked. "Always." "And you think it'll be enough?" "It's a start." She studied him for a moment, then reached for the flour sack again. Her hand lingered on it before she pushed it farther back on the counter, out of sight but not out of reach. "You'll tell me when he's close," she said. "I'll tell you before anyone else knows," he answered. May nodded once. "Good." Outside, the voices faded toward the barn. The sky beyond the window had darkened, clouds stacking heavy in the west. Elias stepped back toward the door. "Are you going somewhere?" she asked. "Checking the fence line." "Expecting company?" "Just making sure we're not already entertaining it," he said. She watched him go, the door closing soft behind him. The kitchen felt smaller without him in it, the air carrying the faint scent of gun oil beneath the smell of flour. May's eyes returned to the counter, to the hidden weight inside the sack. She didn't pick it up again, but she didn't move away from it either. The knock came just before dusk. Polite but heavy enough to be heard over the simmer of the pot on the stove. May wiped her hands on her apron and opened the door. The sheriff stood there, hat in hand, smiling too wide for the dim light. "Evening, May," he said. "Smells like you've been working your magic." "Just bread," she replied. "Best bread in the county." His eyes flicked past her shoulder into the house. "Mind if I come in?" She stepped aside without answering. He walked in like the place was his, placing his hat on the table and easing himself into a chair. His hands rested on the wood, fingers tapping once before going still. "Been writing most of the day," he said. "Can't remember the last time I had a meal worth the trouble." May brought over a loaf still warm from the oven. The crust cracked as she cut thick slices, steam curling upward. She set them in front of him without ceremony. He tore a piece with his fingers, chewing slowly. "You still have the touch. Folks talk about it, how a bit of your bread can make a hard day easier." She didn't look up. "Eat while it's hot." He reached for another slice, dripping with butter. "That bounty hunter is still around." His voice was casual, but the tone was set too neatly to be chance. May set a bowl of stew in front of him. "Are you here to eat or gossip?" "Just keeping up with neighbors," he said. "He seems the sort to stir trouble." "Not in my kitchen." The sheriff sipped from the cup she placed beside him. "Word is he's been making friends in the wrong corners." May ladled more stew into his bowl. "If you're worried, you can speak to him yourself." "I would, if he was here." "He's here," she said evenly. "Just not in this room." The sheriff's smile thinned. "It doesn't seem polite, keeping out of sight." "Politeness isn't the same as safety," May replied. He leaned back, studying her over the rim of his cup. "Are you keeping him safe?" "I'm feeding him." "That's not an answer," he said. "Then maybe stop asking." His gaze narrowed, though his smile returned. "You've gotten sharper over the years." "I've got a reason." He took another bite of bread, chewing with deliberate slowness. "You've always had a way of protecting what's yours, even when the fight wasn't worth it." May slid the butter dish closer. "Eat before it cools." The sheriff set down his slice, elbows on the table. "I could take him off your hands. No fuss for you." "If I wanted him gone, he'd be gone." He studied her face, then chuckled low. "You've got more grit than most men I know." "Flattery won't get you another serving." He laughed without warmth. "Maybe I should stop by more often." "Maybe you shouldn't." Outside, the wind rattled the shutters. The sheriff finished the last of his bread, wiping his fingers on the napkin she'd given him. "You bake for anyone else these days?" he asked. "No, not even for me." "You're eating it now," she said. He pushed back his chair, the legs scraping against the floor. "I'll be seeing you again soon, May." "That sounds like a promise." "It is." He picked up his hat, brushing the brim with his fingers before settling it on his head. "Tell your guest I'll be looking for him." May held his gaze. "If he wants to talk to you, he knows where to find you." The sheriff smiled again, small and practiced. "Good night, May." "Night." She watched him leave, the door closing with a soft click. Through the window, she saw him mount his horse, riding slow enough for the sound of hooves to hang in the air. Only when the noise faded did Elias step from the back hall. "You let him sit here." "I let him feed himself," May said. Elias looked toward the table, at the crumbs and the empty bowl. "He's fishing." "I know. He's not going to stop." "Neither am I." Elias leaned in the doorway. "One day he'll come for more than bread." May gathered the dishes. "Then I'll make sure he leaves with less than he came for." She carried the plates to the sink, the water hissing as it hit the basin. Elias stayed where he was, watching her work. "You ever think maybe he's here for you as much as he's here for me?" he asked. "I've thought about it. And doesn't change a thing." Elias gave a small nod. "Then I'll be ready." "Good," May said, drying her hands. "You should be." The last of the light was gone from the window. The house smelled faintly of stew and bread, but beneath it lingered something sharper. The memory of the sheriff's smile, wide enough to hide the teeth behind it. The night was still, the kind that carried every sound too clearly. May stepped out onto the porch, drawn by the faint scrape of boots on dirt. The lantern by the door cast a small circle of light, and beyond it, she saw him, Elias, leaning against the same fence post where she'd found him days ago. His hat was tipped forward, shadowing his eyes. He didn't look at her right away. "Couldn't sleep," he said. May crossed the yard, her boots crunching over the dry ground. "Or didn't want to." He gave a short shake of his head. "I'm leaving." She stopped a few feet from him. "Tonight?" "Before the sheriff makes his move." Her arms folded. "You think running will keep him from finding you?" "It'll buy me time." "You're not the only one he's after." His gaze lifted to hers. "Meaning what?" May stepped closer, resting a hand lightly on the fence. "My sister's death wasn't an accident." Elias's jaw tightened. "Calder, the same man who tied you here once tried to do the same to me. My sister got in the way." He didn't speak right away. The quiet between them was thick enough to feel. "Why didn't you tell me before? Would it have changed anything?" He looked away. "Maybe." May's eyes stayed on him. "You think leaving will make him forget you?" "I think staying will make it easier for him to finish the job." "And what about the ledger?" His mouth pressed into a line. "That's my problem to carry." She shook her head. "Not anymore." Elias leaned back against the post, his fingers brushing the rough wood. "You've got a ranch to run. You don't need my trouble." "My troubles started 8 years ago," she said. "The day Lena didn't come back." He studied her face, searching for something. "And you've been holding on to this ever since." "I've been waiting for the right time to act." "And you think that's now?" "I think you showing up tied to my fence means the time's been chosen for me." Elias exhaled, slow and tired. "You don't owe me this fight." She stepped closer until the lantern light caught the edge of his face. "And you don't get to decide what I owe." For a moment, neither moved. The wind shifted, carrying the faint smell of rain from the west. "You're certain Calder had a hand in it?" Elias asked. "I saw him with the sheriff the week she disappeared." "That doesn't prove." "It's enough for me." May cut in. Elias's eyes narrowed. "Then you want the same thing I do?" "Yes," she said simply. He looked past her toward the house. "If I stay, it's going to get worse." "It will," she agreed. "And you're fine with that?" "I've been living with worse for years." Elias rubbed a hand over his jaw. "You're stubborn. Comes from surviving." The moon slid from behind a cloud, lighting the fence line in pale silver. Elias stared at the post where the rope had cut into his wrists. "I remember thinking I wasn't going to see another sunrise." "But you did," May said. He met her eyes again. "Because of you." "Because you were worth cutting loose," she replied. His mouth twitched, almost a smile. "You might regret that." Not yet. The night pressed in again, the quiet settling over them. Somewhere near the barn, a horse shifted, the sound sharp in the stillness. Elias pushed off the post. "If I stay, we'll need a plan." "We already have one," May said. "Does it end with him gone?" "One way or another." He nodded slowly. "Then I'm in." May stepped back toward the house, glancing over her shoulder. "Come inside. Morning comes quickly." Elias hesitated, then followed, his boots scuffing lightly against the dirt. The fence stood behind them, silent and unchanged. Though both knew it had marked the beginning of something neither could walk away from. The sky was still black when May heard the faint creak of leather from the yard. She stepped quietly to the window. In the pale wash of the lantern hanging by the barn, Elias was saddling his horse. His movements were deliberate, quiet, like a man leaving without wanting to wake the house. She didn't bother with her boots. Crossing the cold floor, she reached for the loaf she'd baked the night before, still wrapped in its cloth. By the time she stepped outside, the air was sharp enough to sting her lungs. Elias glanced up when he saw her, but he didn't pause. "Didn't mean to wake you." "You didn't." He cinched the saddle tight. "Better I go before the sheriff decides the fence was just a warm-up." May stepped closer, holding the loaf against her chest. "And you think being out there will keep you safe?" "Safe enough to finish what I started." She didn't argue. Instead, she moved to the side of the horse and slipped the bread into his saddlebag. "You don't have to bring it back." Elias's gaze flicked to her, something unreadable in it. He gave a single nod. "Didn't figure I would." The quiet settled around them again, broken only by the restless shift of the horse. "Are you going straight for Calder?" she asked. "I'm going where the ledger is first. Then Calder." May's arms crossed, her breath visible in the cold. "And after I keep moving." She tilted her head. You think you're the kind of man who can keep moving forever? I'm the kind who has to try." The lantern light caught the faint lines at the corners of his eyes. He swung into the saddle in one smooth motion. May stepped back, giving him the space he seemed to need. "You could stay," she said. "I could," he agreed, though there was no weight in it. The horse shifted, impatient. Elias adjusted the reins. "If Calder comes here—" "He already has," May said. "And I'm still here." His mouth pulled into a tight line. "Then keep it that way." She didn't answer. He looked at her one last time, then gave a small nod. "May." "Elias." Without another word, he turned the horse toward the road. The sound of hooves was muted in the cold air, each one carrying him farther from the yard. He didn't look back. May stood there until the dark began to thin into gray, her arms drawn close against her body. When the last sound of his horse faded, she turned for the house. Inside, the kitchen felt different, though nothing had moved. The stove still held the embers from the night's fire. The air still smelled faintly of bread. She set the kettle on to boil out of habit. It was then she saw it, lying on the table, wrapped in her own apron. The cloth was knotted tight. She crossed the room and untied it, the fabric loosening to reveal the revolver Elias had hidden in her flour sack. Her fingers brushed the cold steel, the weight of it heavy and certain in her hands. She set it down on the table, the sound dull against the wood. May folded the apron neatly, laying it beside the gun. She didn't know if he'd meant it as protection or a warning, or both. Either way, she wasn't about to give it back. The kettle began to whistle. She poured the water into her cup, steam curling into the cold air. She sat at the table, the revolver resting within reach, and drank her tea while the sun began its slow climb over the land. Out past the fence line, somewhere on the road that led toward Calder, Elias was riding with a loaf of bread in his saddlebag. She imagined him stopping, breaking it open, tasting the last thing she'd given him. May let the thought sit for a moment, then pushed it aside. She had her own work to do. The revolver stayed on the table.